Let me ask you a question. Right now, if you were to open your laptop or look at your phone, how many open browser tabs do you have? 37? Maybe more? Or what about that graveyard of half-written drafts? Or the guitar sitting in the corner that hasn't been touched in 6 months? Or maybe a brilliant business plan resting comfortably at, say, 90% complete? Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to perform a clinical autopsy on exactly why you leave things unfinished. Because chances are you've been telling yourself a very specific, quiet lie, that you just lack discipline.
Your graveyard of abandoned projects is not a monument to laziness. I want you to really sit with that for a second. We have been sold this exhausting story that procrastination and leaving things undone is a moral failing or a sign of poor character. But the clinical research paints a vastly different picture. Your inability to finish is actually a highly sophisticated neurobiological survival mechanism. Seriously. Your brain isn't broken. It is operating exactly as it was designed to under a perceived threat. Which leads us to the core premise of our explainer today. If it's not laziness, what exactly is your brain protecting you from? Why does your prefrontal cortex, the logical planning part of your brain, seem to just shut down the second you hit that 90% completion mark? Well, the answer is that your brain has stopped treating the project like a task and started treating it like an invisible threat to your ego. To understand how this trap works, we need to look at three distinct psychological and biological pathologies.
Let's move right into our first pathology. Section 1, the Zeigarnik tension loop, or the weight of unfinished business.
This completely explains why those abandoned projects never truly leave your mind. Back in 1927, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something fascinating. She saw that waiters could remember incredibly complex orders perfectly, but the absolute second the bill was paid, that memory vanished. The brain desperately holds on to interrupted or incomplete tasks, keeping them highly accessible. So every unfinished project you have is an open cognitive loop consuming your mental RAM. This creates a chronic, low-grade anxiety that just constantly runs in the background of your life. It masquerades as burnout, but really, you're buckling under the biological weight of unfulfilled potential.
For the modern knowledge worker, a massive slice of your mental capacity is being eaten up by this unresolved cognitive tension, those open loops. Rest and recovery are just entirely squeezed out. You feel utterly overwhelmed by this internal pressure. So what do? You seek temporary relief. And ironically, the way your brain seeks relief from the crushing pressure of old projects is by giving you a sudden, intense urge to start something brand new. That brings us to our second hidden mechanism, Section 2, the dopamine anticipation trap. Why starting feels like winning.
Okay, we need to completely dismantle the myth that dopamine is simply the brain's pleasure chemical. Dopamine is actually the chemical of anticipation, not just reward. Notice the massive spike here at 10% completion. When the canvas is blank and the potential's infinite, your brain absolutely floods your system with dopamine. But look at the 90% mark. This is what we call the effort discounting dopamine cliff. By the time you are nearing the end, the novelty has completely worn off. The brain heavily rewards the initiation phase, but completely starves you of motivation during the final stretch. It evaluates the remaining effort, sees that the initial excitement is gone, and just pulls the plug.
This quote sums it up perfectly. Anticipation generates stronger dopaminergic activation than attainment. At 90%, the mystery is entirely gone. Your brain does a rapid cost-benefit analysis and realizes the remaining grind isn't going to give you that same chemical high. So to get another hit of dopamine, your brain jumps to a new idea, a new domain name, a new hobby, a fresh notebook. So you aren't lazy, you're just navigating a neurochemical mismatch where your biology actively punishes you for trying to tackle that final 10%. But there is a third mechanism, and honestly, this is the darkest and most hidden of them all. Section 3, the terror of evaluation, perfectionism as a shield.
Let's look at why your amygdala, your brain's primal threat detection center, unconsciously perceives completion as a literal biological threat. On one side, we have infinite potential. As long as your project is unfinished, it's safe, it's unjudged. In your mind, that unwritten book is a flawless masterpiece. But on the other side, we have finite reality. The exact moment you finish, the moment you click publish or submit, the wave function collapses. Your work enters the real world where it is vulnerable, evaluated, and inevitably flawed in practice. Your nervous system doesn't treat this exposure as a professional risk. It treats it as a survival threat.
And that leads us to a massive, massive reframe. Perfectionism is not high standards, it is threat management.
Really let that sink in. We often use perfectionism as this socially acceptable excuse for not finishing. We say, oh, I just have really high standards. But clinically, perfectionism is a trauma response. It's an elegant psychological shield. Your brain calculates that as long as the work isn't perfect, it isn't finished. And if it isn't finished, it cannot be judged and you cannot be rejected. You are actively choosing postponement as protection. This fear of evaluation hits a very specific demographic incredibly hard. Section 4. The gifted child identity, when potential becomes a prison.
If you were a high achiever growing up, you'll immediately recognize adult gifted child syndrome. When you are praised early in life for being naturally smart or having effortless potential, your ego gets completely tied to your intellect. You learn to subtly equate struggle with a lack of intelligence. So when a project gets hard, usually in that boring, difficult middle phase, you abandon it. Not because you can't do it, but because struggling threatens your core identity as the smart one. By keeping things almost done, you preserve your flawless self-image. You never actually have to find out if your best is just ordinary.
So, with all this neurobiology working against us, how do we fix it? Section 5, Protocols for Somatic Closure. Retraining the nervous system.
This is why generic productivity advice like just use a planner fails spectacularly. It treats this like a time management problem when it's actually an emotion regulation problem. The absolute first step to retraining your nervous system is stripping the shame from your past. We are going to take your graveyard of projects and clinically relabel them. That abandoned failure, let's label that a concept finish. Its psychological purpose was simply to satisfy your initial curiosity, and it did exactly that. That wasted time, that's a learning prototype. It was a completely necessary step for skill acquisition. You didn't fail, you gathered data. Doing this immediately starts lowering the threat level in your brain.
Next, we use the micro-closure protocol. We literally have to manually bypass the amygdala. Step 1, define a flawed B- version of your task. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done. Step 2, finish this contained, safe little failure in exactly 20 minutes. Step 3, and this is crucial, pause, close the laptop and take 3 deep breaths. Engage your vagus nerve. Step 4, literally let your nervous system register that you finished something, you were exposed to judgment, and you survived. You are manually teaching your brain that completion is safe. The most crucial takeaway of this entire explainer really comes down to this. Decouple your identity from your output. The project is just a project. Completion only reveals what the work can do. It does not dictate your intrinsic worth as a human being. The world doesn't run on the infinite potential of your unexecuted ideas. It runs on the clumsy, flawed, finite reality of finished work. Which leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. Look at your graveyard of ideas. Your nervous system was just trying to protect you, but you understand the trap now. You see the mechanics of it. So, out of all those beautiful 90% finished projects sitting in the dark, what are you finally going to expose to the light of day and finish first?